the mindfulness of self, I would want to extend the conversation that we have built upon since morning and over the period, over the last 2 days as well, particularly on the works that Dr. Manushi brought to the table. The idea here is going to be to start to look at the first three aspects of emotional intelligence, and which is aspects of understanding our emotions, managing our emotions, and then of course particularly the aspect of self motivation. And what are the ingredients or what are the aspects that might aid us in the process, and from the mindfulness lens. Um, just to get started and just to get connected to the previous session, the first thing that comes to my mind is, why do we need it? Why do we need to be mindful? Why do we need it particularly, and more so for ourselves? Are we not mindful of ourselves, right? So essentially, drawing from the previous session, I would say we, all of us, we have our own challenges to deal with, our own fears, right? Fear of unknown, fear of, some people have fear of flying, of heights, of public speaking, of chatting with strangers at a party. It could be just any kind of fear. But we all live with and have our own sets of fears of different things, and which essentially is something very often, and those particular situations where the fear gets triggered, we find it very difficult to deal with ourselves in those situations. So obviously, we have our fears. Then there can be situations, or we do have on certain aspects, repetitive thought patterns. Repetitive thought patterns could be induced, triggered externally. Like, for example, in the initial stages when the pandemic happened, you kept listening to a lot of news, you kept listening to reading in a lot if there was any print media which was available, and that would have triggered some anxiety out of the repetitive thought patterns that we would have put ourselves into. And perhaps we would have created a mechanism or a method at a later date of saying, I'm shutting this off for me because that's bothering me. So those repetitive thought patterns could be to do with our personal events, or it could be about the social events, or the environmental events, or the organizational events, as in the very first slide, set of slides Dr. Manushi was talking about. They can, just keep rolling into us when we are into the bed. Most often, they bother us when we are all by ourselves, and that's something which becomes even more difficult because it can create sleep disorders, it can create depression, it can create all kinds of anxiety and pressures within ourselves, with those repetitive thought patterns. The other aspect which can be related is the worries about the future events. Say, for example, in current situation, I will again take the pandemic situation, just in case, and from my own experience, other day when I was traveling from Delhi to Mumbai, and on landing, I was subjected to a forced COVID test. As in, if you land up over there by flight, you are supposed to be either bringing a test which is not more than 48 hours older, or you have to undergo a test. And obviously, for the first 2 days that I was staying over there, till the time the results were not out, certainly it creates an element of worry about an event which is likely to happen. So it could be, a day or a two, or hour or 2 hours, or it could be years or 2 years. So it can be any kind of a timeline, but we can be creating and be worried about the events of the future events which are likely to come up. Right. So that's the kind of situation. Or it could be a job restructuring. Very often you see that there's a new structure which has been induced. Say, for example, the new education policy when it comes into place. And when you have the new education policy, obviously there's going to be some kind of changes. Or particularly if you look at the data from or the happenings in the in Uttar Pradesh, particularly, you would realize that there's something which was called Shiksha Mitra, and there was a Supreme Court order around that, which the government had tried to kind of bring about change to it. So those kind of events, when they happen, they all create worries for, and I did get a chance to meet up with some of those Shiksha Mitras, and how anxious and worried they were about their own future is well understandable. So those can create a lot of, stress in ourselves, and create anxiety. Then there could be situations when we likely to be unrealistic or perfectionistic expectations that we have to ourselves, right? Like, for example, and without meaning, rather with a lot of respect, I would say you come across a lot of women colleagues who have this necessary expectation, both from the system and for themselves, to be the best mother, to be the best wife, to be the best teacher, to be the best person in the office, as a subordinate, as a superior, as a boss, and that those kind of different masks, or those kind of roles that we play in our life, and if we try to be perfectionist in each of those, that is certainly is a very unrealistic expectation that we create for ourselves, and that creates immense pressure. I don't know if any one of you would have read a particular book which came from a lady called, if I'm not mistaken with the name, Anita Moorjani. She's a lady who suffered of cancer. She was in coma for over a month, practically 35 days, in some hospital in Hong Kong. And when she recovered, she has narrated her experience of being in coma and her reflection of the life, and where essentially she is talking enough in terms of how she has been operating in those perfectionist roles all the life, without having to care about being a little more perfectionist or a little more realistic about herself as a human being. And that mindfulness, it's an immense read, and I will very strongly recommend if you are able to lay your hands on it. As I said, the writer's name is Anita Moorjani. She's only written one. She's given a series of interviews after that. You would find on YouTube, in Australia and other places, she has given interviews about her experience of being in the 35 odd days of coma, and where she actually says she was not numb. She had the complete rewind and revisit of her experiences in that state of coma, which doctors termed it as a state of mental ineptness or coma. So that's essentially another aspect which creates a significant stress and unrealistic, undesirable aspects to ourselves. Then there could be situations of being over scheduling compulsions. Some of us are extremely and overly planned, right, with everything at the moment to moment. Like, how, pardon me for saying this, but that's typical nature of such kind of programs. But some people might be getting a little more impatient if the program doesn't start on time, because they see that that's the schedule that they have on their minds, right? And these can create significant challenges for a lot of people. They find it very difficult to quickly adapt to the changing scenarios and situations, or the Vayuka that Professor Manushi was talking in the morning about. So those kind of compulsions. On the other side, there could be other people. I'm jumping the gun, going to the last one. There could be other people who might be more in the zone of procrastination, right? Of failing to plan it, right? They just go with the flow. They are overly preaching. They deal with the situations off the cuff, and a lot of time they find themselves on the wrong side. They might find themselves at the wrong side because they have not planned, they have not anticipated, they have not worked upon it, and they find it very difficult to deal with those situations. And there could be other people, or some of us, who might be having a difficulty to be assertive. I'm not saying aggressive, I'm not saying submissive, but they have the difficulty to be assertive, right? So these are the different kinds of challenges that all of us, in some shape and form, in some levels, that we all have. And that's where whatever we heard in the morning, and some of the questions which were coming around, I would put it this way, that it's not the expectations that the world puts upon us. I think it's more important to recognize that what are the expectations that we levy upon ourselves, out of those expectations that anybody in the world might be asking you for. Say, for example, very simple things. If your son is to go to an engineering college and you have the limited means, but you aspire that your son should go to the best engineering college, then it's your aspiration as much as it is your son's aspiration. For somebody else, another parent, it might be the same situation saying, work hard, win over a scholarship for yourself, and then get to US or wherever you want to go to, the best of the world-class schools that you want to go to. But don't expect that I would be, sacrificing or earning through my life and through my nose for the same purpose. So it's just about the perspectives. It's just about the way that we articulate those expectations to ourselves. As much there might be the worldly expectations that we might have, right? So coming from there, these necessitates that we get a little more mindful of this aspect of the kind of expectations that we create of ourselves, for ourselves, and the kind of emotions then that we furnish and breed and reinforce in ourselves, right? So if that's clear, let me move to the next one, which is about what is mindfulness. To be very honest and to start with, mindfulness is a construct. Mindfulness is a concept which has been derived nowhere else but from the Indian thought process and Indian thinking. The name over here you find of an expert who is Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is supposed to be the mindfulness expert. He owns it up that he drew significantly from the Indian text, a heritage in terms of the aspects of shaping the dimensions of mindfulness. So having said that, how does the mindfulness get defined? Mindfulness is the basic human ability to be present, to be aware of where we are and what we are doing, and not excessively reactive or overwhelmed by what is going on around the world, around us. Right? So it's just about being in the moment is the aspect of mindfulness without and being very objective in that sense. Right? Let's look at further how Jon Kabat defines mindfulness is the moment to moment, very critical, non-judgmental awareness, cultivated by paying attention in a specific way. That is in the present moment, and as non-reactive, as non-judgmentally, and as over-heartedly as possible. So that's the aspect of, or the definition of mindfulness that he arrives after. He is one person who has gone through significant, if you look into his biography or the resume on the Indian text, particularly coming from the the kind of thought processes that we have been referring to once in a while. So what it essentially means then mindfulness is, and when you are mindful, you observe your thoughts and feelings from a distance. So you actually choose to become an objective bystander in that moment without judging them as either being good or bad. Right? So you just put yourself away from yourself, and as an objective bystander, you try to read yourself or your thoughts and feelings. When it is cultivated intentionally, it is referred to as deliberate mindfulness. It is perhaps all of us have to do in due course of time if we have to improve upon our emotional intelligence. So we have to cultivate. And when we cultivate
How it is different from being conscious?
How is it different from consciousness? Consciousness.
How it is different being conscious? Being conscious and mindfulness is the same or different?
It can be used interchangeably, but at the same time, when you look at consciousness is essentially more or less the same construct, but driven from the aspect of a little more, if you look at from the perspective of how do you draw internal energies. Mindfulness is about the deploying a little more of that, that intelligence side to it into this consciousness and adapting it for the real world use. So the consciousness, when you are talking about, some of the most achieved people in the world that we refer to, say, for example, the guru of Swami Vivekananda, I'm forgetting the name of it.
Ramakrishna Paramhans.
Ramakrishna Paramhans. So Swami Paramhans can be called as certainly attained a very high level of consciousness. There are a lot of people who might have attained a very high level of consciousness by sitting in those, going up into the Himalayas and would have deliberated into themselves or meditated and arrived at the consciousness. But the mindfulness is about when you come down into the real world and deploy that, that awareness or that consciousness with a real world appreciation of the things. I hope that helps to get that distinction.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you. So when it spontaneously arises, it is referred to as effortless mindfulness. When we gain that through our internal reflection without having to make too much of an effort into it, as it says, it's effortless mindfulness. So a mindfulness is a quality that every human being, all of us, already possesses. It's not something you have to conjure upon. You just have to learn how to access it. There is something within ourselves. And that's the whole thing that we are talking about, that it's inside out. We have to discover this internally, and we have to bring it up and access it in the appropriate fashion to be able to put to use. Okay? Now, before I move further, let me put it this way. Why is it so difficult? Well, it is in us. What makes it so difficult? The first and foremost is because we cannot instruct the mind what not to think or what not to do. A simple exercise, if I give you over there, I say, close your eyes for 30 seconds and try and do this. And I say, don't visualize a white elephant. Can you stop yourself from not visualizing it? The moment I say it, you see a white elephant in your mind, right? And then you say, oh, I've been told that I should not. And then you bring about that image and remove it. So that is how the mind negates. Okay. So this is what, it's not so easy not to think or to not, train your mind not to do something particularly. And which is where the mindfulness becomes very difficult. And you would realize that in most of the meditation methods, the first and foremost things that's presented or pushed for is saying not. Right? How can you stay in the moment and just focus on your breathe? Right? And the whole idea is, how can you take away your how can you arrive at this not to think aspect? So that is the first aspect which makes it difficult. The second is because we get our sense of self and personal identity through our thoughts. Right? As Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And hence, you are not able to push away your thoughts because you think that's you. That's your identity. That's me. Because this is the way that I think is my identity. And hence, it's again that fear of unknown, that if I let go of this thought, would my identity retain? Would I still be myself? If I don't think, will I be myself? That's another reason why getting mindful or being mindful is even more difficult. Right? And the third and equally important aspect is because our minds have a negative bias. A vast majority of thoughts are both redundant and negative. Very simple thing. Each of you think of yourself. Your son or a daughter goes out and has said that he or she is going to come at a certain time and it doesn't arrive. And give me, or think of yourself into your own reason as to how many times necessarily the untoward would have happened. Practically none. Right? Or even if one of in 1,000 odd occasions that the son would have got delayed or daughter would have got delayed, that something untoward or something, not major, but still something untoward would have happened. But the moment there's a delay and you start looking at your watch and you start wondering if something has gone wrong, the mind operates in that direction. That's a negative bias. This is how our minds are built, primarily as protective devices that attempt to starve off possible future traumas, betrayal, and disappointment. So we try, the mind starts to think in that direction, because mind wants to prevent any such possibility or a future trauma or betrayal or disappointment. And in that anticipation, this negative bias starts to arise into our minds. So it's an automatic trigger. We don't have to trigger it. We don't have to say that at this moment I'll start to think it. So these are the three critical aspects. We do not stop to think. We feel that's our identity, the way that we think, the whole halo that we were talking about. And the third is that most times we have this negative bias, and that doesn't allow us to be equally mindful or sufficiently mindful about things. Right? So these are the three things that we have to learn to prevent, and it's very difficult to get into it. Of course, the most methods that you would find in the process are around meditation and kind of stuff. But my idea is not to take you through into those zones at the moment, but instead we'll try and see what are the relatively more emotional intelligence and emotionally cognitive methods of dealing with that. And of course, you have all the choice to go with this, the meditative route in this direction. Okay. So the three core skills then which are required, which any such program would try and bring you, is about developing upon concentration, the ability to focus and stabilize the attention, the sensory clarity, that is the ability to keep track of the components of sensory experience as they arise in various combinations moment to moment. We keep hearing it, and which is where there is a mudra when you are doing a meditation, which has been talked about. Very simple things. People say if you keep your hands like this, you feel the positive and the cool air on the palm. Try and turn it on. You feel it different. Right? So it's the sensory clarity. So it's about recognizing those sensory experiences in those moments of being mindful, which is very important. Which is where sensory clarity with regards to when somebody says, take a deep breath, count 10, it's just about that sensory clarity at that moment. Is something which has been recommended. Right? And the third aspect is the equanimity. We will deliberate much more on this. The ability to maintain mental calmness, composure, evenness of temper, and especially in difficult situations. And if you recognize this specifically, which was coming out of our own data, when I was talking in the previous session, that we see that most aspects are about dealing with the negative situations. This whole aspect of when you need calmness, we don't necessarily require so much of calmness and composure when the situations are positive for us. We need it more when the odds are high against us. When we need to control our temper is when the anger is rising high. And hence, that equanimity becomes very, very critical as a core skill, one of to be mindful. Excuse me. Going forward from here, some of the major benefits which have been researched and established, that it's related to stress, that not only associated with feeling less stressed, it's also linked with decreased levels of stress hormone cortisol. There's this hormone in us which is called cortisol, right? Just the adrenaline is there when you are excited. When there is stress, there's a induced hormone secretion which is called cortisol. So there have been both physiological and psychological researches which suggest that mindfulness, and I think that's something very essentially Dr. Tripti is going to take up as part of the destructive emotions when we talk about it. Right? The second is it facilitates emotional regulation. It elicits positive emotions and minimizes negative effect, helping us to be more efficiently control our emotions. Third is it creates capacity for empathy and compassion, can enhance our ability to experience empathy and compassion towards others, in turn strengthening interpersonal relationships, and perhaps due to the non-judgmental attitude that we cultivate. Since we are non-judgmental to things, we can relate better with people and people can relate better with us. Right? And which is where a lot of times we measure people let's understand the values. Right? I might hold a value on some aspect, but can I necessarily measure and then respond or engage somebody? That's what empathy and compassion. So we have to lead people with their own values that they bring to the table and the way that they operate and work with. Right? Depression and anxiety. It can lead to a significant decrease in negative psychological symptoms associated with depression and anxiety, like stress, rumination, and negative attitude. Rumination is again that repetitive thinking that we are talking about. Right? So it helps to reduce all of that. Now, having shared this, let me talk about the different ways which have been recommended to be mindful. Right? First of all, it, as the definition said, just being consciously present. Being in the moment. If you are here in this session, leave away for a while what might be bothering you either administratively or academically or whichever way. Is it possible for us to do that? So how can you break away or to create that switch in ourselves, which is about switching on and switching off from the situations? Not easy. Very, very difficult to do it. But to be very consciously present in the moment is the first and most critical, essential of being mindful. Right? Should use short mindful exercises at work. So there are so many given, and we can create more exercises, but particularly the two aspects that we are going to talk about later, I think that should help you in every of those moments which might be inducing stress in yourself. But use those short mindful exercises just as everybody recommends those, 10 seconds. Be a single tasker. So while multitasking is a virtue in today's world, we know it all, and that's something which gets recognized more often. But it doesn't mean that I don't involve myself in several tasks at the same time. But at the same time, it's just about being consciously present. It relates to the first one. So if I'm doing something at the moment, even if it is as simple that I'm teaching my daughter, who might be a 5-year toddler, let me be present in that moment. Right? So can I be able to, and that's something which is, we'll take up subsequently in the mindfulness of others, that's very, very important. Because if you're not there in that moment, to start with, you're not completely authentic to yourself, and certainly not to others. So hence, the single tasker doesn't necessarily mean that we don't take up multiple tasks or multiple roles onto ourselves. But at the moment, when I'm doing a particular thing, can I be with it without having to get bothered with 5 other things which might be sitting parallelly on my table? Right? The third, the next aspect is use mindful reminders. What are these mindful reminders? Now we can create, and a very simple methodology that I would share over here is something that we call is keeping gate. And I assume that somebody is still working at something else is where we get the noise here. Right. So use mindful reminders is something that we call as gatekeepers. These gatekeepers are not far away from us. What is the role of a gatekeeper? Think of it in your own space. What does a gatekeeper do? Whether it's in your office, it's your home space. A gatekeeper allows only the desirable to come in. And that's what we mean by the gatekeeper, is essentially saying, get the near ones, maybe in office, somebody, maybe at home, somebody, and share with them that this is something that you are trying to practice. And whenever you are drifting away from that, that person could give you some kind of a signal, some kind of a reminder, some kind of indication of the common language that you create with that individual. And that language doesn't have to be necessarily in words. It could be just some indicative expression that can come by, which can remind you, saying, oh, am I going wrong again? Am I drifting? So that's something which is use mindful reminders. Slow down to speed up. There are times in our journey, there are times in our career, there are times in our personal space that we have to step back. We have to slow down. Right? You might take a little more effort, just a simple thing is, in the academic setup, I think whether it is about getting a job or whether it is getting promotion and moving up into the ladder, one of the very critical things is how many papers and how many referred papers that you have published. What does it mean? So one might aspire saying, I'm a fast tracker, I need to be put into every 3 years that I need to get a promotion, and quickest and the fastest, and in the 9 years or 10 years, I want to be a full professor. But then there might be so many occasions, because it might happen to your luck that it happened the first time, it happened the second time. But I take the time to meet up all those requirements, because very often most people find that they get stuck from associate to the professor. Right? Not because of any other reason, but because at some stage, some of those measures, now there are AICT measures and UGC measures and etc., that you need to have certain fulfillments, and you didn't find time to complete those in your journey. So it's about slowing down to speed up and to find that pace for ourselves, right? So make stress your friend. So stress is an everyday, every moment thing. In a moment you feel elated, the next moment you feel stressed. You have your son's wedding and you are extremely elated, but at the same time, one of the guys, the band guy doesn't turn up and you have a stress. Or your best friend doesn't turn up and you have a stress. Or it starts to rain and you have a stress. So you don't know. So the stress can emerge just from anywhere at any point of time. We can take stress for anything. And which is where the idea is, make stress your friend rather than saying stress bothers me. It's about rewinding the language of it into our minds. Not easy, once again, but can I? Again, the first aspect or the difficult aspect, can I ask my mind not to think? Right? So if that's something that I can do. So quickly looking at it, fair. One, Dr. Tripti was talking about yesterday, finding solutions. First, get into that mode of getting easy with it. Some people get excited with it. They say, okay, there's a challenge. I enjoy challenges. Let me see how I can deal with that. And then finding a solution to the problem. So that's make stress your friend. And a very significant aspect next is feel gratitude. Feel blessed, feel gratitude. The contentment aspect that we were looking at from self-motivation, it's a very, very important thing. Right? If we don't bring that gratitude in what we have achieved, what we have got, what the Lord Almighty has been kind upon us. I mean, it's as simple as this. Very often, it's an adage, but how often do we practice it is about when you look at others, you realize that how much more benefited or privileged that me and you have been, or with the silver spoon that we might have been born. When I say silver spoon, it doesn't necessarily mean the riches. It's just the intellectual horsepower, which is a differentiator for each of us sitting over here, 140 people that I see on the screen. How many people have it in the world? This is just maybe, and put together, I would say, the number of teachers of your level that we have in the world, in the India, in the country ourselves, that would be not even a percentage. So feeling gratitude of this aspect that we are blessed with this, if not the riches, the gratitude of knowledge that we are blessed with. And that leads to cultivating that humility. That gratitude automatically triggers that humility in us to say, if I have the knowledge, I think it's the onus on me how I can share this knowledge. The whole idea of creating this program, and with the perspective that you heard the other day from Professor Rajiv Tripathi, from Dr. Deepti, I think it's just about creating the platform, that humility to be able to share and impart the knowledge and bringing everybody together to be able to create this. That humility is a very important thing. That humility creates that self-actualization. The two things, the gratitude here and the humility, it creates that sense of actualization. It is not necessarily always those material gains. And when I say material gains, I also include those promotions and the levels and positions that we might acquire in our journeys. Except what you can't change. And this is something that we are going to delve further in future, in the next sets that we are going to talk about. But except what you can't change. Dr. Manushi was also talking about in the morning It's just about acceptance. You can't change a human being. You can't change the situation. You can't necessarily change any condition or context that you might be put into. So if you can't change, what's the best way? Change yourself only to not get affected with that. Right? So how do you find our methods of changing some things which still can't be changed externally? So can we bring about that change in ourselves and adopt a growth mindset? If we continuously on that quest, the drive, morning, one of you had asked this question, about if somebody doesn't have that achievement mindset, what do you do? Honestly, as human beings, that's the only differentiator I guess we have as against any other species in the world. If we don't have that growth mindset, if we don't have that drive, I was sharing this example of a 96-year-old gentleman who is writing a book. He has done 18 books. He learned computers at 86 years of age. Just imagine the growth mindset. And he's just not exception. There are umpteen. There's just umpteen such people who have that growth mindset. And that's the only mantra, that's the only sutra for a fruitful life rather than a long life. Right? So that growth mindset is very, very critical. And which is where, again, I'm taking back to Anita Moorjani, who could have just come out of it and said, okay, fine, I'm good now. Or why did she go about writing a book? This lady has never worked in life. This lady has never written a book in life. She is not an academician. She doesn't know nothing from those spaces where we might be coming from or where we might be judging her from. But when she comes out, she feels her responsibility, the gratitude, the humility, and what she can change through this growth mindset. And she decides to write this book. So I think that's where these are some of the aspects which are very, very critical from the growth mindsets. Okay. Some of the one of the models that I came across, which is called RAIN model for dealing with the difficult emotions, which has been referred to as RAIN is the acronym for recognize, accept, investigate, and non-identification. What is recognize? The emotion you're feeling, name the emotion your mind is, if you can, which we have been talking about. It's just about appropriate labeling of the emotion that you are experiencing. And then accept it, right? Yes, you probably don't like the feeling, but the reality is the emotion is there in that moment. And can you just accept that, yes, I have the right, and this is something that triggers in me, and so it is. Just accept that feeling. That's about being in the moment. That's about the mindfulness. Then try and investigate a little bit. Become curious about your experience. Where do you feel the emotion in your body? Which part of your body? If I was to ask you, if you are experiencing an emotion, you can have a physiological symptom to it as well. It might be here. It could be on the eyes. It could be in the ears. It could be just anywhere. It could be on the chest. It could be your legs paining. It could be your arms aching. It could be just anywhere. Try and see the impact of that emotion on yourself. Where is it affecting you? What kind of thoughts are going through your mind parallelly? So what is triggering that? Investigate that. Try, investigate not to negate it. Investigate to appreciate it, understand it. And then non-identification at times. See the emotion as a passing event rather than who you actually are. Separating it from your identity. Just that different images are reflected in a mirror, but are not the mirror. Today, if I wear this gray shirt, is that my identity? Tomorrow it becomes something else. Different emotions arises and pass in you, but you are not you. They are not you. You are yourself. The most powerful step is non-identification, right? And which is the second step, as we spoke about, or the difficulty that we have. How can we separate ourselves? Am I a sad person? Can you label yourself as that? Because if you started labeling yourself as that, that certainly would transcend over the period of time into a depression. So it's just about relabeling or moving away from that or non-identification. Non-identification more from the sense of it becoming your identity. And that is something not easy to do, but we have to. And that's when you find that you are better resolved and you are better equipped. I mean, there are a lot of times you get a feedback, right? And it doesn't fit your image that you see yourself as a mirror, right? It's as simple as this. Not every feedback in our lives. So feedbacks are critical. Feedbacks are important. We have to have our own methods of receiving them, but we also need to have the method to sift them, to see what is relevant for me. Because there are people, and we do come across very frequently people who kept on receiving the feedback and working on it and not realizing that they actually lost their core. Over the years, they did not realize it, but the fact is they don't know who they are. Right? They become very different people. They go away from their original personality or the individual that they were, which is actually about reflective of the lack of confidence in self, lack of belief in self. Right? So hence, it doesn't help if you make any of those things as identification of yourself or identity of yourself. Sometimes you just need to do one step at a time, whereas other times you may want to work through the whole formula, the whole of this cycle. Practice using the formula whenever you can. So when things become challenging for you, you will find it easier to use it. So think of any of the situations within your mind when you had a situation or any of the situations which might be running in your real life at the moment. Think of it, recognize, put a label to that emotion. I'm again saying, put a right vocabulary to it. Simply calling it sad, bad, ugly is not going to help, right? Put a right label. What exactly are you feeling? Accept it. Yes, I'm feeling it. Investigate it. What's causing it? Let me see. Where is it affecting me? In which ways it is affecting me? And then, of course, to dissociate yourself from it as an objective bystander and say, this is not me completely. This is not always me. It might be now, but it's not always me. So I think that's something which is very essential. We have to kind of look at and work towards. So that makes sense. So before I move further, I quickly take this one slide, which has been extensively researched. If some of you would have heard of this international organization called Lauminger, which was created by two gentlemen, Lombard and Eisinger. So the two names put together, it became Lauminger. This company was a very respected company in terms of leadership research, and they talked about what makes a difference as a leader. And they essentially arrived at this kind of curves. So you see there the black and the green line as against the orange and the yellow line. The managerial skill, they help at the mid levels, but not at the senior levels. The technical skills, they become relatively less relevant as you keep going up. But certainly when you get into the leadership levels, what's more important is the interpersonal skill or the EQ and the capability. And we'll see what capability means, right? Capability is very differently defined, and which is where the whole convergence between the mind and the heart is something that we are going to talk about. The capability from the perspective of intelligence. Intelligence, not from the lens of IQ, but intelligence more from the capacity of dealing with complexity, or the VUCA that Professor Manishi was talking about. And I would very briefly try and introduce you to the whole concept of capability, which has been over 80 years researched in Harvard, right? And it's a very strong predictor. Yesterday, somebody asked me, what is the percentage of EQ that it contributes to success? Let me put it importantly. As you can see on the slide, there are two aspects, EQ and capability. And let's see what is that capability piece. Beyond those 20%, which the IQ facilitates, these are the very two critical aspects which facilitate the self-actualization as we might define it. Right? So over here, before I move further, a quick check in terms of Any questions if you might have?
Yeah, in the Rhine model, the first step R and the last non-identification looks contradictory to each other.
Yeah.
But when you recognize and label, what happens? Can you just throw some light on it? I just recognize you're telling me to label it. What happens when I label the emotion?
Okay, good question. And good you brought up this, dilemma that it creates in your mind. So labeling the emotion is in the moment. It's about recognizing it, providing a right vocabulary to it so that you know exactly what you are experiencing. Right? So it's in the moment that you are experiencing. But non-identification, essentially what it means is that doesn't mean that is the only thing that defines me as an individual. That's not my identity. As I said, if I'm feeling frustrated for some reason, if that's the emotion that I label, am I a frustrated person in life? So the moment you transcend it from one to another, from recognition to identity, that compounds it, that becomes difficult. And that creates even more stress further. Because if you recognize that one title as your identity is the difficulty that you create for yourself. And that's a distinction when you make. So recognizing is important just to be able to, deal with that emotion. But that certainly cannot become the only and primary identity for yourself or the overriding aspect. As I said, it might cause over rumination on things. It might lock you into that process. It might not allow you to be mindful and deal with it if you'd call it as your identity. Right? And as I said, the sadness, you labeled the sadness in terms of whatever, frustration, not getting a promotion, or once or twice or thrice missing it. Does that mean that you are a poor professor? That you are a not so good professor? Should that challenge your identity? And that's a distinction over there. Right? So recognizing it only helps me that, yes, let me understand what's causing it. Is it simply because I have not got the promotion? Am I putting sufficient effort to be rich enough to be able to contribute? Do my students accept me? Do they value me as a teacher? Right? And if that's that's something that I create alternative identity about. And this is what we were talking about in one of the questions yesterday, which was posed, of saying between the teacher and the taught. That's the only thing that brings the taught to the teacher, even after 30 years. If you have created your identity, which you are confident about. Students wouldn't go back to a teacher who is so very much self-involved, compounded, complicated, and not able to resolve with their own emotions. Right? They go back looking up to the teacher. And which is the difference of identity and recognition? I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Dr. Mohit?
Yes.
Deepa here.
Yes, Deepa.
Self-identification. See, for example, I identify myself too much with my job. I'm so passionate and proud about being a teacher. One fine day, I lose my job. And can I take this non-identification principle to that also? I lost my identity as a teacher, but then can I shed that over-attachment to that identity and move on to the next higher purpose? Is that also corroborating with this RAIN model?
So I really appreciate you, ma'am. I think you are being very candid with things. Once again, I'm repeating that. Let me put it this way. You're losing a job in an institution doesn't take away your identity as a teacher.
Exactly. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you are still a teacher. Discomfort in yourself to be able to talk about these things just makes you to be such a great teacher to yourself and to everybody else. So that's exactly. So losing that job with a particular institution doesn't define your identity as a teacher.
Yes.
And
So,
which is where you were talking about the other aspects that you were dealing with in the morning when you were sharing your experience. You are a teacher at heart. You are teaching at yourself. You are teaching everybody around, and you are, that genuineness, that humility. I think those are the qualities that you bring to the table as a teacher, and hence I don't think anybody simply won those episodes of life can't take away your identity as a teacher.
thank you.
My pleasure. Any other one more quick question before I move to the next? Okay, so I assume we are clear with it. So now I'm bringing you a construct which has been extensively researched, and I think there's two aspects that we are going to talk about going forward. This should aid you or come in very handy to be able to resolve and reconcile and deal with your own emotions more effectively. Okay, so first and foremost, I would talk about this whole aspect of convergence of four journeys. The four journeys is a construct picked up again from the works of Aristotle by a lady called Gillian Stamp, and she's a prodigy of the work, which is the second part that I'm going to talk about, which has been led at Harvard. So she essentially talks about that we all have four journeys to ourselves. We all traverse four different journeys to ourselves. And that's very critical from the mindfulness lens. The first and foremost is a very evident public journey. It's our experience at work, in the real world, in which we put our capability into the public domain. When the public journey makes heavy demands, it can sometimes seem as if this journey is the only one. When the work journeys, you go back, you say that you spend 8 valuable hours at work or 10 valuable hours at work. Where is the remaining 14 or 16 hours? Where does it go? But we categorize this public journey into our life, and very often, that becomes overpowering, overbearing, and creating taking most part of our mind space. But that's a journey. That's a public journey. Okay, public journey is something that most people around us, they know about it. Right? Where do I go for work? What is the kind of work that I do? What is the kind of job that I do? And what is the role and profile that I'm into, etc., etc. So that's the first journey. The second journey she talks about is the private journey. It is also that belongs, is all that belongs to the place we leave and return to every day. This is those 8, 10, 15, 16 hours. This is at my private space, right? We may live alone or with a partner and share this journey with family and or with close friends. All of them look for time, energy, and attention. Right? Today in the social media age, this journey has got significantly compromised. Pardon me for saying that. We don't meet up our friends. Its birthdays are only about one message. We don't even care to call up each other. Right? So that's the private journey, which has nothing to do with my public journey. These are very immediate and very close set of people that I return back to. These are my social systems that I get back. And what they know about me, what they are privy to. I am certainly, more closer with them, and I share more with them as against what might be available as part of my public journey. Right? Because of whatever reasons and compulsions and comforts that we might have created in the space that we privately are. Right? So that's a private journey. Now, beyond this, there's the next level of journey, which is called personal journey. It's through which we care for ourselves and find time and space for reflection. Some people give very little attention to this personal journey until they face a crisis. Right? Dr. Deepa, you were talking about your experiences. Just reflect upon it. How much this everything else would have, and then so for everybody else, how much do we have attended to this part of it for ourselves for a very long time?
Yeah.
Right? So till such time we experience the situation. So that's a journey that I have with myself. That's a conversation that I have with myself in my own private space. This perhaps at times even my spouse might not be aware of. My best friends might not be aware of. This is a journey this is a whole conversation that goes internally within me. But this conversation, we don't find space to do that. We don't find time to do that. And which is where it starts to come and emerge to become more mindful that I still need this space. I need to have the space of myself. And then comes the fourth journey, which is the journey of self. Of course, all these other journeys are journeys, of myself only. But the journey of self, as it has been defined, is what unfolds for us over the years. And an important element in it is the growth of our capability. This journey of self helps each of us to hear our own story, to see the inner continuity of our lives. Essentially, what this means is my whole conversation with my past and my future. It's as simple as this, that after this conversation, if you have to go for a certain meeting, unless you have had your conversation in your mind that you have to attend that meeting, you will not be ready for it and you will not go there. Mind moves much ahead of us. And so also in your career journey, if you look at it from the long-term lens, right? If you don't hold your conversations with your future, and not just with future, with the past. So it's a whole horizon that you hold your conversation with. This is more internal, this is more subtle, and which is where, again coming back to the morning question of this individual, if there was anybody who feels self-actualized. But that's not self-actualization if he doesn't have a drive. If he doesn't have a dynamic goal in life, right? So that's the journey, which is a continuous journey. It's a long journey, and my conversation with that. This essentially comes, as I said, from the Aristotle's work. Now, interesting aspect in this, which comes from the mindfulness, is certainly the public journey. For a lot of us, if you are too introverted, private journey might be a little difficult. Personal journey becomes even more difficult because we don't find the space for ourselves to reflect, or time to reflect. And then journey of self, in the absence of this journey or this conversation with ourselves, we don't find where we are heading towards. What are we trying to gain? What is my, that end goal of actualization that we are talking about? And hence, each of these journeys is necessarily with each of us, but then these journeys have their own role to play. Now, interesting aspect then is how much, and you could do a little bit of an exercise to yourself, putting them into 4 quadrants and trying to see how much these journeys are uniform, converging, and how diverging are they? Which essentially means is, where is it from the public journey? What is too much of the hidden pain into my private journey? If that pain is too big, pain when I mean is P-A-N-E, not P-A-I-N, right? So if that from the public to private is a significant hidden pain or hidden window out there, then I find it very difficult to deal with it, because every day I am only into that rush, into that, my most energy goes into saying that what is hidden, let me try and keep it hidden. And hence, to find a reconciliation between the private and the public journey to the extent that is possible is very, very critical. This creates significant anxiety, pressure. If you are hiding something to yourself, which is not, you are not allowing it to come to the public journey, then it makes a lot of stress internally to ourselves. Going from the private journey to the personal journey, right? Now, if I don't think about those things, if I find there's too much things which is worrying me, but I can't even share with a friend, I can't share it with my wife, I can't share it at work, I can't share it anywhere. If there's too much into that zone, if there is nobody that I can go back to, I don't have that social system, I don't have that social apparatus with which I can, then it becomes even more difficult and to handle the emotion that it arouses now. And I think that's where it becomes very, very important that we ensure how much that we try. And it doesn't mean that I open up everything with everybody in this world. Don't get me wrong on that. But what it certainly means is that I need to have that mechanism. At least if there is something that is bothering me, can I go to the right person and speak up and tell what Dr. Manushi was talking about in the morning? Do I have that comfort of being expressive? Can I go and resolve with somebody that I have it without being judgmental, without being preemptive. And that's going to be, and this essentially, when you look at it from the personal journey to private journey, it becomes even more difficult. Say, for example, you have some kind of a issue or some difficulty with your spouse, but you are unexpressive. You are not able to say it. What's likely to happen? Is it healthy for the relationship to go forward? Will it continue? Will it support? Will it enable? And that's where the convergence between this private, and that would continue to create such a significant stress internally. Perhaps at some stage that it would create avoidance. This you might try to translate into your public journey by spending more time in office or every other thing, because you can't speak up, you can't deal with it, you can't address it. Right? So each of these, if you really look at, and then of course, journey of self. So you have these public journey, private journey, personal journey, and there are certain situations in our life where you don't know. We are doing everything. You are a husband or a wife, you are a teacher, you are going home, you have a lot of thoughts in your mind, where someday it starts to come into your mind is something that I think Mr. Jha was trying to ask in the morning. He's saying, I find relevance, I start finding that meaning. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And you find that you don't have answers to it. Because whatever I might have been doing, I might not have been seeing it from my journey of self as to where is it taking me. Did I consciously get into it, or did I just went along all this while into that flow? Getting into that flow is not bad. But then, was I conscious of it? Was I mindful of it and making, navigating it rather than just going with the flow with it? Right? So these four is something at a deeper plane. And if you really start to, you find a method to yourself of being mindful, I think in operative sense, being mindful is if you are able to resolve some of the aspect into each of these journeys. That would just enable you to be better equipped to deal with your emotions and augment the emotional awareness and management of emotions. Make sense? So before I go to the last part, any quick questions on this?
Dr. Mohit, could you please come again with the author or the researcher that you were mentioning? Convergence of Four Journeys.
Sure. So it's Gillian Stamp, Gillia.
Okay, thank you.
Stamp, Gillian Stamp.
Okay.
You also would find a website in her name called gillianstamp.com.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So any other question before I move to the next aspect, which can enable us significantly going forward in our general effectiveness with ourselves? Great. So I assume and move further. So I now bring you another related construct, which has been, yeah. So this is called the concept of flow. Okay. This concept of flow is very simple. In the work situation, sorry, something has got cut in the bottom, but I'll tell you what it is. So we have, as we spoke about in this slide, the capability aspect. The capability, as it has been defined at Harvard, is the capacity to deal with the complexity at work or in personal situations. Capacity to deal with complexity. Okay. So on the bottom axis, you see over there on the x-axis, you find capability over there. On the y-axis or vertical axis, you find the challenge. Challenge is the environmental demands, the work demands, the situational, the contextual demands that I'm faced with, that I'm posed. Right? So when there are situations, different situations in our life, then my capability or my capacity to deal with complexity marries well with the complexity that the world poses to me. Okay? And that's been referred to as a state of flow. And mind you, there's significant amount of research on this work which has gone into it. And this concept was created by a gentleman called Mihaly, M-I-H-A-L-Y. right? And there's a lot of research which has happened in the armed forces, particularly in the US and Europe. And what they have tried to figure out is that it's hardly about 15% of our lives that we are in the state of flow, which essentially means that we are sufficiently equipped to deal with the challenges that we are faced with. It's only about 50%, 15% of our lives. And it says also, the researchers have established that if you only increased it by 5%, if you made it 20%, any individual's effectiveness goes up by 200%. So finding flow for another 5% of the time in our lives, it increases or doubles our effectiveness at work or any other situation and dealing with the situations. And hence, what it premises is that there could be situations in our life where the challenges are surmountable. The challenges are just too big. The challenges are, overwhelming. But I'm completely not ready for it in terms of my capacity to deal with that. Each of us can think of those situations. And those situations cause anxiety. They become overwhelming. We don't find how to deal with those situations. We feel the world has been unjust to us. Dr. Manushree was talking about internal locus of control and external locus of control. And within that, with external locus control, I start blaming the environment and the world that it is in. And mind you, a lot of times, it so happens, very often in the organizations, that we get promoted. A adage you might have heard is, we get promoted to our inefficiencies. That's exactly what it means. Most times people, they get promoted into the higher complexity demanding roles and responsibilities, and they are not even ready for it. They would have been in the state of flow in the previous level of complexity, but they are pushed up into higher order complexity and they fail, or they find it very difficult. And there are umpteen examples. A classic example, without having any political reason or connotation to it, we know what is the kind of impact somebody like Dr. Manmohan Singh has had on the economy. The Indian economy opened at the time when he was initially the governor of Reserve Bank and subsequently the finance minister. I'm talking about 93, 94, 95. I think most of us would recognize that. But 10 years as a prime minister, I think the jury is out. Right? So it's about being into the role where you are completely in control with the kind of demands and complexity that you are faced with. Just as much on the other side, there could be situations in life where I would have matured to deal with higher order complexity. But the challenges posed to me haven't. There's so many situations where you start looking back and you say, I don't enjoy doing what I'm doing, what I was doing till yesterday. I was enjoying it, but I don't anymore. I want something more. I want that kick. I want that challenge. And that's where gradually what starts setting in? Some element of boredom, not finding your complete, in sync with the space that you are into. You might be redeploying your energies into something else. You might choose to do some things in parallel, right? Not necessarily most times in conflict of interest, but yes. So that's the other side of it. So finding that yellow beacon in the middle from the lighthouse is a very difficult thing. And I think that's the biggest responsibility. And look at this application. Why do you think different students respond differently in your class? Some people would make less effort, but they are still very effective when it comes to scoring, when it comes to being interpersonally effective, and comes to organizing things. While other students, they might be tremendous bookworms. They might have all the capacity to bring about and answer your questions that you might be posing, but the slightest of increase of demand, put them into the project and they start finding themselves to be very difficult. It's just about creating that flow. And I think that's the mandate. It's a very difficult thing to do, but it's about creating that flow for people. And I think the onus here is a lot dependent. And when you are into the state of flow and somebody that helps you to create that flow is where you find the connect that it builds up, emotional connect, which we'll talk about the, the mindfulness of the social mindfulness when we talk about the book. Right? So this is something Now, just to help you a little more with where does this articulation come from in terms of the capability or the capacity to deal with challenges. This capacity to deal with challenges is very different from being either analytical or evaluative. It's about dealing with a situation when you don't have data, not with dealing with data. And this is incremental. And all of you would appreciate that early stages of career, you needed greater clarity of things. Otherwise, it seemed more complex. The Vyuka that Dr. Manishi was talking about, which was the aspects of uncertainty, ambiguity, etc., that we were talking about. So it might seem, in the absence of that clarity, it might seem ambiguous, it might seem uncertain, it might seem complex. But that is at the earlier stages of the career. And I think we need to be mindful when you are dealing with different situations, all those situations that you might be experiencing with your students. This estimation, this appreciation is very, very critical, because we try to prescribe solutions from where we are coming from. It might be difficult for them to most times even comprehend, and particularly those kind of situations. Say, for example, one of you asked a situation which was about failed love situation. Now, if you as a professor, you are looking at a higher order of complexity, which we'll talk about what are the orders of complexity or the levels of complexity. If you are coming from that zone, you might lose the engagement or that audience with your student, because he doesn't know what exactly you are talking about. Or maybe he starts to think that you are not understanding completely what he is going through or she is going through, right? So let me make it a little more granular in terms of how do we kind of get a methodology or a vocabulary which we can very intuitively use to assess, engage ourselves and people. And this is, as I said, 80 years of Harvard research led by a gentleman called Elliott Jack, and it's been longitudinally established. And it's a very big breakthrough and very tremendously successful approach in terms of leadership effectiveness that we talk about, or organizational effectiveness. It is all encompassing when you look at the organizations. So essentially what it talks about is that we, at different stages of our journey, add meaning into different domains. There are 3 different domains that we add meaning into. The first one is adding value to the present. So, for example, as a student, when everything is provided, the book is given, the curriculum is given, the course is given, the dates are given, when your exam is going to happen, more or less, approximately. Everything is kind of given. So all that is required is that I'm supposed to be assimilating all of that, put together, and get a meaning to myself. Gradually, you migrate to the next level of adding value to the present, which is about helping somebody around, right? Let me see if my friend is able to do as much or as well, or any of the subject, if he or she needs help. Stepping beyond, but it's again in the present. The third is that you also see that whether as a teacher or as a student, we start creating and engaging in creating methods or systems or mechanisms so that most people can be effective. Most people can be effective around me. This is all the value domain of present, right? Then it comes the value add into the future. The value add into the future is the aspect of saying, how do you create a value for tomorrow? Envisioning, looking into the future, creating, so any of you who would be in the, the position or leadership positions, you would realize it's about creating sustainability. It's about ensuring that the organization, so much of additional aspects to make the organization relevant and keep it relevant, right? So that's something when you start adding value for the future. You start bothering and looking at and contributing, and this is the higher order ask that we have on ourselves as we progress into our journey. This doesn't happen in the very outset. And then comes the third value add domain or meaning domain, which is the value system. So how do you create at some stage, you by your work of research, you by your intellective thinking, intuitive sense, you create the order for tomorrow. how the things are going to look like. When you write research papers or aspects of saying when this COVID is going to go away, or what is going to be the situation, or what are going to be the life cycles, how the things are going to transcend and look different into the future. It's different from the second domain, because there you are converting it into a framework for deployment. Here you are into a relatively more, as you call it in the research world, is the blue sky thinking, but you are creating an order. To give you an example, the simplest example is Gandhi's, the whole aspect of ahimsa or satyagraha. Even after so many years of Gandhi not being there, 70 years, still holds so much of relevance. And not only in India, it holds relevance all over the world. And that's the aspect when you add to the value system. So new thinking, a differentiated thinking. So for example, in the corporate world, you have examples like, for example, for that matter, when IBM was saying there are going to be only something like 5,000 supercomputers or the mainframe computers in the world, Microsoft came and changed the face of the earth. At the moment also, at least each of us on an average is sitting with 3 of them, either in form of mobile or in terms of tablet or in terms of laptop, and so also with OTT and etc., which is happening. Right? So that's the change of the order, what you envisage and you impact and you make it. Now, let me give you a little bit of data. When you look at these 3 domains of value over here, the first domain is where if you assume that 100 people started from here, there's only less than 12 who will migrate into the zone in this world. That's been established, as I said, with 80 years of research and longitudinal research. Less than 12% who go into the orange zone from the blue zone. And it's then very well to be assumed, what is the level? It's not even 0.1% who goes into this zone. That's the pyramid of the world, if you would want to call it. Any system, political system, social system, educational system, wherever you look at it, this pyramid actually is definitely there. And mind you, none of them is less important or more important, but you need it all in some senses, right? Because if you don't have people who do this, you don't have a world which is functional. If they don't do the touch and feel, if you don't do their job, hands-on job, if you don't have those people who keep your systems functioning and clean, then you have a very big difficulty at hand. Think in the pandemic situation. Those people who went out, who aided. And then the next set, the people who are overlooking that, who are trying and ensuring that these people are getting supported and they are able to deliver what they are delivering. That's the second set, right? That's even more critical, because if you don't have that, these set of people, they don't feel that they have, or they feel orphaned. They don't feel that somebody is enabling them, aiding them. And there's no consistency in what you are offering over there. And hence you need a set of people who are at the second level over here, which is called service. Then the third set of people, if they don't work on creating the mechanisms and systems, then any of these is not going to function as a consistent mechanism to be delivering it. Right? As simple as this, if you don't create an education policy, right, you don't have a set of people to run with, and you don't know what's going to come to these people. As simple as. Now, when I'm saying need for an education policy, or the brass tacks of education policy, or your administrative calendar, end of the year, or your academic calendar. When I'm saying educational policy, I'm not talking about the national policy, but I'm just saying from the institution lens. So that each of these is, as I said, is critical, and you can't survive without it. Right? And then a set of people who involved in this level, value add for the future, is very, very critical, because they are the ones who are sitting on the periphery or the fence of the organization and ensuring what kind of tide is coming from outside. They envision, they create methods to be able to deal with those situations which are outside of the organization's direct purview or demands, like pandemic. They create the methods to cope with that. They create the mechanism, even with the academic setup. Today you have so much of a challenge, particularly we are experiencing with this whole technology piece. Yes, it has come in a big way. It has become a boon, but as much of a bane. Because today, I notice around me that the students, a lot of times when you are running online, and you all would connect with me on this, that students online, when they are being evaluated, when they are being tested, there's always a risk. As much that you might say, keep one video on and answer the questions, etc., etc. There's a big challenge. There's a very big challenge out there in terms of authenticity of outcome, right? So to be able to still, not make it a 0 year is something that a set of people are consciously and continuously working at, ensuring that it doesn't become a 0 year for students, right? And then the strategic intent, it's about, sustainability. It's about creating that, momentum to say, this is a 5-star institution. Now you have the star rating for the educational institutions as well, etc., by some agency in Bangalore, if I'm not mistaken. So how do you create that? How do you get most of those laurels? How do you get best of papers out? How do you create independent thinking? How do you create the credibility for your system? For the management schools, it's about how you create credibility with the market to be able to get the best placements for your students. Producing the best guys in the market to be available for. So those are the kind of challenges that the set of people. So each of these, as I said, and I'm not going into this, if you want me, I can certainly, which is here is when what you call as corporate citizenship is about creating a methodology or a mechanism for something which is transnationally relevant. Like, say, for example, the organizations like WHO or those international forums, which are the thought leaders and torch bearers, supposed to be. There's lots of criticism in the modern world with regards to the way that they are behaved. But then the kind of thing that you expect over there, the kind of light that you expect those might be showing. And of course, I spoke about Gandhi over here and those kind of relevant people, or Colin Powell, or so many others that you can think about. So essentially, each of them is extremely necessary and relevant. You can't undermine one and say we can live without any of these in this real world, particularly these two in any of the organizations that you are and for, right? And hence it becomes very, very important. Next is to say or to recognize where am I on the journey. And that's a mindfulness. It's about saying what keeps me. Where is it in the organization system that I'm more conducive to contribute? That suggests what is my readiness on this in the capacity to deal with challenges, right? So that recognition in ourselves makes a significant difference, because then I stop comparing myself. I don't get worried simply by saying, if I don't become the head of the department, because I love, as Dr. Manushi said in the morning, she finds her forte in research. She finds her pleasure in doing all of that. And so
సర్వాగలు అంటాడు, ధోనిలు అంటాడు, పంతులు అంటాడు ఉంటే సగటు 200 నుంచి 250 300 రాక బ్యాటింగ్ పిచ్ అయితే కొంచెం ఆడతారు. మరి రాహుల్ ద్రావిడ్, గంగూలీ, లక్ష్మణ్ వీళ్ళు ఉన్నప్పుడు 200 220 కన్నా దాటేది కాదు. చాలా ఎక్కువ 220
figure it out externally as well. But correct me if I'm wrong. This is quite an interesting. You don't need to necessarily need sufficient external aid.
Bowling batting bowling much excellent. RCB కుర్రాడు బాగా వేసాడంటే సిరాజ్ బెంగళూరు అతను.
Dr. Mohit, you have been muted and there is someone. Yeah.
Am I audible now?
Yes, now you are. For a while you were muted, Dr. Mohit.
Thank you. So I'm just saying This is a very intuitive framework. We all have the vocab, we all understand it, but we might not have had the vocabulary. But what's more important is if we are able to recognize this should be able to help us to recognize where we are in the moment when we are. And that causes emotion in us. That causes each of these things, either anxiety on this side or boredom on this side. And honestly, as I
Excuse
said,
me, sir.
if you are, yes.
Sir, actually, I think you are sharing some slides for a quite long time, and I'm not able to see any of them.
Is nobody able to see, or?
We are able to see. We are able to see.
We are able to see.
Ma'am, it might be your bandwidth issue, maybe. But in any case,
We are able to see.
Ma'am, you should
Dr. Mohit,
click.
can I ask one question?
Yes, sir. Please. I'm almost done. So I was any case coming to that.
So, Dr. Mohit, the question is on
Yes,
the
sir.
previous
Yes, sir.
slide.
We are able to see.
The question is regarding your previous slide.
Yes.
So here, I was just actually try to comprehend the notations you have given. Anxiety C greater than S. Does it mean the complexity is more than the situation?
Yes.
And in the
Complexity is
boredom,
more than
you say
the skill. It is S is a skill or capability. The complexity is more than the capacity or the skill, as it has been mentioned over here.
okay. C means complexity, S means skill.
Exactly.
Okay. So you are
But
saying
the skill in a much wider sense.
okay, in the boredom you say C is less than S.
Yeah.
Now I am referring to this beam, yellow beam, where you are showing the flow. Here, to my mind, it should be C is equal to S, but you are denoting it by C greater than or equal to S. So this actually I am not able to comprehend.
Yes. So see, this is, let me put it this way. When we are working, so we continuously seek challenge. Am I right on that? Because we seek challenge, what it indicates is that we operate in something like a sine wave. Something like this. We go in a sine wave. What I mean by that is we seek to go above, we seek more challenge, and then we find that I'm running out of my flow, and then I come back. So there's a continuous, and that's why the donation of saying or reflection in this manner of saying C is equal to or higher than S is about, because if I don't keep on that quest, I lose my drive. Continuously, say for example, a very simple thing is, particularly as an academician, if I would look at it, you're running your programs, you're running your courses, classes, etc., etc. But then you suddenly decide, saying, I need to put in a paper which is of international record journal or some post. Why do you do that? You can continue to run your programs, you can continue to run your sessions. So which is where we continuously, so it's mostly on the upper side of challenge.
Again, you got mute.
And how this is happening in the middle, but let me come again. So what I mean to say is that, at every stage, we are seeking higher order challenge. That's the inner drive that we were talking about. Right? We are not, that's the positive dissatisfaction I was talking about yesterday. Right? And with that as a perspective, I was saying, we actually move like a sine wave on this channel, on this tunnel. We seek higher challenge and then we reconcile with it. Then we seek another challenge and we reconcile. And in the academic setup, as I was talking about, you might have your calendar, you might have your programs, you might have your academic commitments. But then why do you choose to write a paper into an international referred journal? That certainly may not necessarily be only out of the motivation that it's very critical for your promotion, but you choose to do that. And that's not an easy task. I have been an academician myself. I know how difficult it is to do that. So which is where we continuously seek, and that's where we have called it as C greater than or equal to as S, and not on the other side of it. So very little and very few people are into that zone of saying, I'm fine. That would not mean contentment. That would mean complacency. There could be stages for some people where we get complacent. And hence, complacency itself can become a state of low flow or reduced flow towards the state of boredom over the period of time.
So this C here is complexity or challenge, and on the x-axis you are measuring.
So on the C axis, whether you call it challenge or you call it complexity, complexity poses challenge.
Perfect.
So the operative part of complexity is the challenge, and hence you call it challenge or you call it complexity. On the other axis, which is regards to me, is skill or capability. The skill here is the capacity to deal with the challenge. Just to make that distinction for the formula, it has been called as skill, because otherwise C is equal to C or greater than C or smaller than C would have been difficult to this picture.
Thank you, Dr. Mohit. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Pleasure. So any other questions before I quickly conclude? Any other questions if anybody else has? Great. So, these are the kind of measures I'm just presenting to you. There's a very robust methodology to measure it. There are measurement tools, which is called career path appreciation, which has been created at Harvard, and which essentially means at any stage with regards to age, I might be, this is my actual capability or capacity to deal with complexity, but I leverage at any point of time slightly lower, more than, and this becomes the developmental method for me to see, can I maximize over here? And this is also a predictive methodology for leadership to say, if I am on this trajectory by age of 64, where would I be in terms of the way that I would be receiving the world, and how equipped will I be to be able to deal with the world? As you see, three people over here, X, Y, and Z, they all would have a very different trajectory. As I was talking about, as I said, 70% of the people remain through their life. It's less than 12% of people who move to the state stage, and this is 0.1% in 10%. Right? And that's a very robust framework, as I said. So, taking lead from there, now 8 facts about the mindfulness with which I would want to conclude. That in all of this, mindfulness is neither obscure nor or exotic. Unfortunately, it's become very exotic in the modern world because a lot of people are running their shops on it. But it's not something which is very obscure. It's not something, as I said in the earlier slides, if you remember, it is within us. It's just about the method that you have to find to be able to access it. It's not something that you necessarily need something to come to you. But what it certainly requires is some of the aspects that we are talking about, whether it's with regard to flow, whether it's regard to the journeys, whether it's regard to rain, how we are able to pinpoint, identify, and deal with those is something which is very essential. You can go for aid. There are all kinds of stuff which are available in the market today. There are organizations, there are very serious ones which enable. There are some which are doing it as a business and only for the sake of business. You have to be conscious of it. But what's more important is you have to find your own method to it. There's not one method which fits all, right? The mindfulness is not a special added thing we do. It's not something that I decide I will do it every morning half an hour. Please, no. It's in every moment. It's everywhere there. I have to start getting mindful with each of those situations, with the emotions. It's not that spent 20 minutes in the morning sitting in the state of meditation. Certainly not. Right? You don't need to change. This doesn't mean that you have to fundamentally change. You certainly have to change your thought process. This means that you have to bring about change. It's not that. Also, mindfulness has the potential to become a transformative social phenomenon. In the sense, if you start doing it yourself, and if you have that humility, if you have that gratitude, you will automatically be a contagion. You will be an enabler. You will be able to, because if you practice it, it's very natural that you will be able to aid it around yourself. It's not something that you can actually, once you get started on it and you find success with it, that you are going to keep it to be, you are going to be keeping it to yourself. And this doesn't require to do it very professionally. As I said, it's not one-off thing that you do in, those 10 minutes or 20 minutes in the morning or evening or whichever time. And hence, when you are mindful at every moment, then you are transformative and it becomes a social phenomenon. Anyone can do it. It's just anyone can do it. And that's the premise of whole aspect of emotional intelligence, that it's not something that you need as a basic requirement to start with. It's just that you have to have that recognition that you need it. And that's it, right? It's a way of living. Once you get onto this, it becomes part and parcel of you. Simply as I was talking about, and we'll extend this conversation tomorrow morning when we are talking about the aspect of mindfulness of others, you would see the transition of this approach with regards to capability and complexity that we are talking about, how it transcends to every other aspect. Very simple things. When you see somebody on the street, an auto rickshaw driver going in the middle of the road, why does he do that? He only has been made to understand that he has to drive on the left side of the road. But on the left side, the whole road is available to him. That's his appreciation. That's his capability. He has not been briefed beyond that. He needs a brief beyond that. Be patient. Help him. Understand it. You give him the input once with a rationale, with that mindfulness. You find that he practices it for the rest of the life. Right? So that's what I mean. It's a way of life and it's contagion. It's evidence-based. The initial success is extremely reinforcing. Start looking at it the way some of the recommendations are made. Start looking at the world from that lens. It is internally rewarding, enriching, reinforcing. You don't need any external reinforcements to it, right? Because you will feel more resolved internally, and it sparks innovation. It also has been suggested in the research, by induced flow. The defense researchers, they suggested that induced flow increased innovation by 500%. Induced means by chemical induction. They injected certain hormones which created a state of happiness of mind and positive emotion and a state of flow into the people, and they found that those people were 500% more, 5 times more innovative than they were otherwise. So the moment you get into this mindfulness, the moment you get more resolved with your emotions, the moment you are able to deal internally with it, you find yourself to be more creative. You find yourself into be a state of peace of your mind, which enables you to think creatively. And mind you, any dent on this takes away and impacts, and the first and foremost thing that it impacts is your creativity. Think of it that you are in an extreme stress situation and you are trying to, if any of you is good at painting and you are trying to paint out of it. Painting can be a de-stressor. It can be a mindfulness exercise for you. But try and reflect upon your painting if you are in an extreme stress situation. What kind of painting that you are going to create at the end of the day? Will it express, will it bring about a positive emotion? We were talking about Myron Salovey's recognition of emotion, perception of emotion, and looking at it into the artwork as well. Anybody can see it. Anybody can read it. Right? People have the capacity and intuitive capacity to see what state of mind you are into. So that's where, these are the critical 8 facts about the mindfulness. This is not something that you need to undergo a course upon. This is not something that you necessarily need a guru to guide you into it. But yes, you have to become your own guru to essentially beat the most critical 3 aspects that I was talking about, and why it makes it difficult are these 3 things. You have to train yourself to your mind not to think. You have to dissociate your identity from the feeling that you get. And you have to stop these negative biases if you can. As long as you are able to do these 3 things, with any of these frameworks or methodologies that we are talking about. And then it's not a one-day affair. It requires practice. It requires continuous mindfulness, recognition of it, that I am on this journey. Thank you so much. So any questions if you have? I'm mindful. We are extended on time, almost on the time. So if you have any questions, you're most welcome. Yes, those very faintly.
My question is,
I think mindfulness plays a very important role in emotions also. I think your emotions will come down very drastically, or you may not even emote. Can you throw some light?
Sure. Somebody else was talking in the middle and we couldn't hear him properly. Let me also take that question alongside. Sir, can you be a little louder and nearer to your mic?
Yeah, mindfulness can help us in managing our emotions, or to an extent you may not even emote. You are just an observer.
So let me call it this way. Not emoting is not human. As much that we might try, we will still emote. Okay. Emotion, not just in humans, it's also been established in the several animals, other species. But not emoting is not human. So there's no way or no situation that we don't emote. Right? The point is and perhaps correct me if that's something that you mean by it, is how do I display my emotions? Right? How do I deal with my emotions? And that's continuously. Yes, mindfulness is all about dealing with the emotions, is all about impacting on correcting your emotions, or displaying the emotions and making best use of them. But yes, there's no state that we can't emote unless either brain or not dead.
Maybe you have a choice to emote or not. You can choose. That's
exact. Emote purely from the lens of demonstrated or display of emotions, but you will still feel it.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Another hand that I see over there. Sir, get closer to the mic. We are not able to hear you properly. It's faint, but try. We'll try and understand.
Private, personal, and self-journeys are all overlapping.
Yes.
How
Yeah.
mindfulness helps differentiation them to manage emotions?
Okay. Great question. If I understand you right, you are saying there are 4 journeys and how mindfulness helps in that, right?
All are overlapping, so particularly 3 journeys, other than private or public, are overlapping. So
yes.
How to differentiate them first and useful in terms of mindfulness?
So as I said, the differentiation is very easy. It's about public journey is what you know about me or I know about you, right? The private journey is essentially where we get back to you, get back to the space that we were get into, which is your home, which is your relationships, which is your friends, which is where you like to spend time. That's the distinction. The personal journey is what you think, what occupies your mind. That's something is the personal journey. And the fourth, which is over there, is the journey of self, which is this continuity of conversation that we have with our past and future. Where did we come from and where are we heading towards? A lot of people have this humility pangs, as I call it, which is they grew up in a lot of paucity. And very often that becomes an impediment in their future growth because they really are extremely gratuitous of saying what I achieved is great, but then they are not able to see what they can achieve in the future. So these are the 4 things, very easy to distinguish. But the mindfulness is, as I said, how do you kind of bring as much of consonance between the 4 of them? Consonance means that I don't have too much to hide, as I said. I don't have too much to kind of deal with within myself. I can express it to somebody. And it is not that I get worried that where am I going from here? What has this journey been? Has it been meaningful? And start hunting for a new meaning. There's no harm in doing that, but we need to have that, right? And which is all can happen only as mindfulness and internal resolution. This is not something that you can get any kind of a training or a program or externally, or any coach can help you on this. Yes, a coach can aid it, but you have to find your own resolution to these 4 journeys. I hope that answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. So any other question? I see one more hand raised over there, if you have any, before we conclude. I guess we are done with it. I assume that's been raised hand for quite some time now.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Dr.
Yes.
Mohit. Dr.
Yes,
Mohit,
please.
sir, it was nice listening to you for the past 3 days, sir.
Yes, sir.
And today's topic is one of my favorite topics, mindfulness. So many people keep on discussing about these things, and they wanted more and more such sessions and all. Even my colleagues keep on talking about this topic. So I'm happy that your discussion has really given a new dimension to us to make our life better and much better. Thank you very much for your time and your expertise, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate if you find some value and
Not some, sir, more value.
Thank
So
you.
we would be in
Thank
contact
you.
with
And
you. Yeah.
please, at the end of the program, we will certainly share the contacts, and if we can be of any help, continued help after this program, we'll be more than happy. You're most welcome.
Sir. We'll join the journey with you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We have a lot to learn from you, sir, as well, if you are doing mindfulness. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with these kind words, I think I have very little to conclude. Lot of it has already been said, and definitely, as the last participant concluded, I'm sure there's a lot of value addition that we are experiencing. And with these kind words, I would like to once again thank Dr. Mohit for his valuable inputs. And we meet again tomorrow for again an enriching session by Dr. Mohit Kumar at 9:30. So all of you should join in the morning tomorrow. And in the meantime, just a few announcements. We are a little worried about the exams. Please don't be so much worried because it's going to be a simple multiple choice question that I intend to hold after the valedictory. So it's just a 20 marks. We'll do it on the Google Classroom. And I think, we'll have ample opportunity to log in and submit the papers. And even if there are glitches, we'll be there to help you out and support. So that is one. And then, of course, a feedback form we'll design and we'll put in there. And you can send in your feedbacks through that also. And I think that's all. That's the basic requirement. Attendance, it's again not a problem because when you're logging in, it is definitely there, and I can see the records throughout the day. We are monitoring. We are a little liberal. We understand that the glitches are there. So in any case, that will be resolved. So don't worry about, at least on these 3 contexts. Whatever you are learning throughout the day, just give it a good thought when you have spare time in the evening or early morning or late night, so that we are enriched. And when we join, the next day, we have a lot more questions to ask. And I hope, as I told you in the beginning, it's going to be a wonderful journey. So just be connected. And I understand that a lot of you have some work schedules, but still I see a lot of you managing. So that's again commendable, because this is something that is uniquely come up, especially for the academicians. I'm sure industry people are having a lot of such schedules, and Atal has definitely given us a wonderful opportunity. So we'll try to work again, and don't be so much worried about again the glitches and so many other things. We'll definitely resolve it, right? Anything that you would like to ask any of the participant?
I think the sessions are really great, where focus is more on reflections. So really, it's a great designed course. Nevertheless, it would be good if you can also share the PPTs. So just if someone wants to go through it once again. Otherwise, really, it's a great session. Thank you.
Yes, we'll try to share all the PPTs by today evening, whatever we have. And I'm requesting the experts, they're also giving, and it is with us. So we'll do it in the second half, because when the session goes on, we have little less of a time, but definitely we work a little beyond that. So we'll be posting it. So that will be done. Anything else?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Please share it on the mail. It's a request if you're sharing.
Sure.
Thank
Sure.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Have a good lunch and enjoy your day. Thank you so
Same
much.
here, ma'am. Thank you.